So you've been thinking about getting involved in homesteading lately? Well, you've come to the right place because I'm going to share 11 tips that can help you get started in homesteading. So let's get into it. First, let's talk about the differences between homesteading and farming. While there's a lot of overlap between the two, there are some differences. The biggest one is that homesteading is a huge umbrella term that involves many, many different activities. It can involve sewing, making your own clothes, making your own furniture, building your own house. It can obviously involve planting and gardening and raising animals as well, and preserving food. So homesteading is a very large umbrella term, and I haven't even begun to list all of the possibilities here. Farming, on the other hand, almost always requires land. Now, that doesn't have to be a huge amount of land. It can be your backyard. There's many people that have backyard farms. They raise chickens.
I mean, we both are very involved in the garden and the gardening here. It's like become this very complex mix between what is partially nursery work, what is our annual foods, and then beautiful flowers and support for wildlife and that kind of thing. So it's become this like wild scene that I think overall we love, and then we also are trying to figure out like how to make more productive and more organized at some point.
Some even have goats in their backyard. But the main thing is that farming involves land, and it typically involves growing either plants and or animals. And then finally, there's the farmstead. And the farmstead combines both. So let's go on out here and talk about the 11 tips that I have. My first tip is to start small. Think of things that you can do right now, instead of getting wrapped up in some grand dream that you will start sometime in the future. It's great to have an overall goal and to know where you're headed, but don't become so romanced with your goal that you live in a world of fantasy. Focus on now. Use the space that you have, whether it's an apartment or a backyard. There are many homesteading activities that you can do. And by starting small, you can discover those things that you enjoy and those things that you don't like so much, and build your homesteading experience around the things that you enjoy. I got started in homesteading when I was a professor at the University of Puerto Rico Medical Sciences campus. And I had a small apartment, and to get exercise, I would go out walking. And in the course of walking, I noticed that there were seeds from various trees that were just on the ground near the sidewalk or what have you. And so I started picking them up, and I went to the store, bought some pots and got some potting soil and planted them, and lo and behold, some of those trees actually grew. And that was my start. And so I was hooked. I went out and I got more. I bought some avocados and I planted avocado seeds, and all of this on my little balcony that I had in my little apartment. I think at one point I had close to 100 trees stuffed in that area there. And then I took them out and planted them in areas where I thought it might be nice to beautify the landscape with a tree. And that was very satisfying for me as well. I went out and watered them. I cared for them for a long time. So that was really how I got started. And a lot of people have stories like this. So I'm going to walk up here for a minute and check on the sheep, make sure that they have enough food to eat in the paddock. And oh, look what we have here. The sheep are down here. Yeah. Sometimes they come down in this area because there's new shoots of grass that they particularly like to eat. So they've come down here for a visit. My second tip is to set realistic goals.
All I want to do is go to distance.
Avoid overwhelming yourself by starting too many projects at once. Choose one or two things to focus on and then see how it goes. Ideas for improvement and expansion will emerge naturally as you gain experience. The trick is to set solid and achievable goals over a period of time. Stick to them, but be flexible enough to make adjustments when necessary. My third tip is don't limit yourself with preconceived notions of what homesteading is. Although important, self-sufficiency is more than just growing food. You can learn to sew or get better at it if you already know how. You can learn how to preserve food or ferment it. You can learn to cook or improve existing skills. You can learn to repair and build things. You can learn other crafts. You can learn composting or vermicomposting. You can learn aquaponics. The possibilities are endless. By the way, if you like the content that we're creating, please click the like button. That helps me a lot. And also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks a lot. You may remember that about 6-8 weeks ago, we planted some special forage plants that we're going to use during the dry season to help feed our sheep. We are looking at some right now. This is the Cameroon grass that we planted. You can see there's a lot of it that has come up here. Here is the Tithonia that we planted, and here's more of the Tithonia, what they call Botón de Oro here. They call it Mexican sunflower other places. I planted right along the fence. Here's more of the Cameroon grass that is growing quite well in this area. Now we're coming up to the area here where I planted some of the morera, or the mulberry little cuttings. And while I'm sharing tips with you, I'm going to be cleaning around these mulberry cuttings because they're being choked out by the Bermuda grass. The fourth tip is don't quit your current job, or if you are unemployed, find one. All new endeavors require some initial financial commitment, and in most cases, it is ongoing. Without a regular source of income, you will fail. One of the most successful regenerative farmers in the U.S., Greg Judy, worked a regular job for 30 years while he learned, built his infrastructure, and gained experience. Social media is full of stories of people that seem to have quit their jobs, sold everything, moved to a rural location, and started a successful homestead. However, in a majority of cases, you do not know their whole story. Some inherited land on which they built their homestead. Others saved up enough money to buy their land outright. Imagine what you could do without a monthly mortgage or rent to pay. Others have partners that still work outside the homestead. It is important to remember that success can be defined in different ways. Always keep your goal in front of you so that you will be able to know what your success will be and when you have achieved it. My fifth tip is to start your own garden patch. You don't need to fill your backyard with potatoes right away. Start planting in a small area, and if it goes pretty well, expand from there. If you're in an apartment and have a balcony, grow things in pots out there. If you don't have a balcony, ask your landlord if you could put some pots on the roof of the building. If you don't have a balcony or a roof available to you, then see if there is a community garden in your area in which you can participate. If there isn't a community garden, explore possibilities for starting one.
Hi, this is Billy from Permapastures Farm, and I'm standing at an industrial site in North Texas. I just happen to work at this place. It's essentially a commercial and industrial site, and I just happen to work in this building over my shoulder. But somehow I was able to convince the people that run this place to allow me to have a little piece of this ground, or basically everything I'm standing on right now, and to allow me to do something with it. So what I've decided is we're going to grow some food at work, and we're going to do it using permaculture.
Tip number 6 is to get to know your soil. Soil is composed of different percentages of sand, clay, and loam, and billions of microorganisms. Getting to know your soil will help you to determine the types of plants that will do well initially in your area.
Everybody, oh, we're grass farmers. Well, are you? I like to say we're microbe farmers. So if we feed the microbes will feed our livestock. And if it's a good, healthy soil, it's going to be good, healthy food that we feed our communities.
Never stop working to improve your soil. My 7th tip is to avoid unnecessary expenses. There's always something new and shiny for homesteaders to buy. Purchase only what you need and when you need it. And just to show that I'm not immune to being sidetracked into this unnecessary expenses stuff, A couple of years ago, I had convinced myself that I absolutely needed to have a side-by-side vehicle. You may know from previous videos, I carry water up to plants up the top of the farm here, and that's a very arduous experience carrying that water in 2 5-gallon buckets. And I said, if I just had a side-by-side, I could fill up the containers and put tops on them so they wouldn't splash, and drive up there and water the plants, and probably 10% of the time that it took me to do it walking up there. And so I said, I have to have it, I have to have it. Well, Lena decided that I didn't have to have it, and she put her foot down and said, no, you're absolutely not going to have it. And I said, I'm not going to drive it fast, and she didn't care, it didn't matter. I don't drive, and the reason I don't drive is because I'm autistic, and I get distracted very easily. Lena said, you're going to tip it over because the land here is uneven, and I said, no, I won't, they're made not to tip over. And she went online and showed me that people do tip them over, and finally she said to me, why in the world do you want to spend all that money for that vehicle when all you have to do is put a tank of water up at the top of the farm and run some pipe down, and that will allow you to water the plants much more efficiently? And that shut me up immediately, because she was right. It was much cheaper to put the tank up there. But that gives you an idea how you can become romanced by these extra things that seems like you really need them, but in reality, you don't. Tip number 8 is get comfortable improvising. Some of the best homestead tools and devices around aren't for sale in any store, and some of the best farming hacks are not written in any book. They are conceived and tested by people like you. Tip number 9 is to challenge yourself to learn more. Read a lot, attend workshops and conferences, do lots of research. My 10th tip is don't get ahead of yourself. The number one question asked by people interested in homesteading is, how will I support myself? Don't fall into this trap. You're not there yet. Focus on learning and developing your skills. Opportunities for generating income through your homesteading will naturally arise over time. Be open to them, consider each carefully before jumping in.
You know, when we started our farm, my plan absolutely was to actually fill an unfilled niche of having duck eggs that people could buy, because everybody was doing backyard chicken eggs, but nobody had duck eggs. But the problem was nobody really wanted to buy my duck eggs because nobody really was interested in eating duck eggs. It was too strange and different for most people in my area. And so as a result of that, I had to adapt. And that's where you see our farm being very diversified, where we do tree crops, and we have geese, and we do cattle.
Finally, tip number 11 is consider renting land rather than owning it. Many successful small farmers don't own any land at all. They lease it. At some point, you may realize that you have outgrown your current requirements. It's wise to consider renting a parcel of land instead of buying it outright.
We lease a lot of land, and we tried to buy it starting out, so I did everything what the experts told me to do. I bought the land, I bought the animals, bought the machinery, and I almost went broke. Folks, there just wasn't enough money left at the end of the year to make a living. And so I started leasing land. That was in 1999. And today we have 16 farms. I was able to quit my town job in 2009, and I am a full-time rancher.
There are many advantages to this strategy. The first is that you can try before you buy. The second is that there's tax advantages to leasing. And then finally, you could deal with smaller parcels. When you're buying land, you typically have to buy the whole thing, whereas leasing, you can lease part of it typically. Here you can see one of the moreras that I cut around. There's a bunch more of them here, but they're here's a couple behind it. Here's another one here. Okay, so I probably waited a little too long to do this, and the Bermuda grass was able to kind of choke out some of the cuttings that had actually started, but they didn't make it. So I have to do a better job at monitoring what's going on. So that's it. I'll see you in the next video.